Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Wanling, and I will be the moderator of this session, which is titled Pioneers in Educational Exchanges, How the University of Minnesota Established Meaningful Partnerships with China. As you all know, we are very excited to gather here today to commemorate not only the first group of Chinese students that arrived at the University of Minnesota 100 years ago, but also the very meaningful educational exchanges that we've had with China since then. So to that end, this session features several leaders that will share with us how the University of Minnesota has been a pioneer in establishing numerous and meaningful partnerships with China. And first, please allow me to introduce our panelists. Professor Farmer. Ted Farmer is Professor Emeritus of History at the University of Minnesota, where he serves as the editor of Min Studies. He was trained in East Asian regional studies and modern Chinese history. Coming from a Chinese history background, he has tried to see the world and global history from a perspective that resists Eurocentric assumptions. He has a Ph.D. from Harvard University. Thank you.
Should I just talk from her?
No, I'll introduce all of them. Okay. All of you guys. Yeah, sorry. Dr. Kappler. Barbara Captor is Assistant Dean of International Student and Scholar Services at the University of Minnesota. She holds a bachelor's in Economics and Communication from the University of St. Thomas, and a master's and a PhD in Speech Communication from the University of Minnesota. She has over 18 years of experience in intercultural communication, program management, teaching, and research. She currently serves as adjunct faculty in the Department of Organizational Leadership, Policy, and Development. Wenda Moore, Regent Moore, served as trustee of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation in Battle Creek, Michigan for 26 years, and is currently a member of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation Trust. She was a University of Minnesota Regent for 16 years, and the first woman and person of color to serve as a chair of the board. She was selected as a scholar in residence at the Clinton School of Public Service at the University of Arkansas. Is the recipient of the Jim Joseph Award for Visionary Leadership in Philanthropy, and recognized by the Girl Scouts of Minnesota and Wisconsin River Valleys as a Centennial Honoree. Thank you. The last one is myself. Again, my name is Wanling, University of Minnesota Beijing Office Director. I serve the 5 campuses of the University of Minnesota to explore, develop, and sustain various academic and business relationships with institutions and leaders throughout the Greater China. I promote the university's international alumni network, and I also function as the major recruitment officer for the university. And I graduated from Carson School of Management in 2008 with a master's degree in human resources, and currently I'm a doctoral student in international higher education leadership and strategy. So now, each of our panelists will have a short 6-minute presentation, followed by a 10-minute Q&A session. Hopefully we'll have that time. And I will be a presenter first today, and I'm gonna provide a high-level summary of US-China educational exchanges, as well as the exchanges between the University of Minnesota and China. And I'm gonna walk there. So the US-China educational exchanges started as early as the first half of 1800s, when some American missionaries went to China and established hundreds of missionary schools there. And also through their efforts, over 100 Chinese young students were sent to US for education. But this kind of meaningful exchanges between the two countries did not start in a real sense until the early 1900s. And the University of Minnesota started its exchanges with China also at this time. That means we're truly part of the pioneers. And these meaningful exchanges between the two countries actually came to a total halt in the 1950s and all the way to 1970s, during which, as we all know, China's Cultural Revolution took place. And then in 1979, China opened its door to the rest of the world, and its government highly promoted education exchanges with other countries. Then more and more Chinese students were sent to US for education, and more delegations mutually visit each other, and very meaningful collaborations on research also going on. And then in the 1960s, for the first time in the history, self-sponsored Chinese students surpassed the government-sponsored Chinese students. And that resulted in more and more institutions from other countries going to China to set up their offices, centers, and to recruit students from China. And most US institutions actually went to China after the year of 2000. And now, so currently the US-China education exchanges can be described as two adjectives: widespread and multifaceted. For student exchanges, continue to increase by number and continue to expand by type. Another very meaningful exchanges between the two countries are the establishments of Confucius Institutes in US and American Cultural Centers in China to promote language, culture, and understanding between the two governments, two countries. And the University of Minnesota's Confucius Institute and its director both have been reviewed and awarded excellence. Equally impressive is that the University of Minnesota is the only university that has more than one American Culture Center. And these words quoted from the US Embassy Public Affairs officials. I had a meeting with them last week. And some other very meaningful and large-scale popular education exchanges between the two countries going on now are roughly such three types. The first is the cooperative degree or training programs. For example, Harvard offers an executive program in cooperation with Tsinghua University and China, Europe, International Business School. Another example is our university's Carson School of Management. It offers executive MBA program together with Zhongshan University in China. And this program has been rated one of the best joint education programs in China all over the years. And the second of such large-scale popular exchanges going on between the two countries is the establishment of American institutions centers in China. And these centers are to cooperate large-scale study abroad programs, student exchanges programs, research collaborations, etc. Examples would be Stanford Center in Beijing and the University of Chicago Center in Beijing. And the third type is cooperated campuses with legal entity, and this is really a huge hit now. For example, Duke University just opened its office in Kunshan, China, and earlier, New York University has opened its campus in Shanghai, and many others. So this is the very high-level summary of the US-China education exchanges history, and I hope this will be a helpful context for our remaining presentations. And finally, I would like to very quickly share with you some numbers that demonstrate the exchanges between the University of Minnesota and China. All over the years, as a university, we cultivated over 10,000 Chinese alumni. We trained over 2,000 Chinese officials. We have signed over 80 agreements with more than 30 strategic partners and institutions in China. And we have 5 very active, influential alumni chapters. I think that's for my part of the presentation. Thank you very much. And let's next welcome Regent Wenda.
If you do them, that would be fine. Yes, just however.
Sure, okay.
Yes. All right. Why don't you put that one up? Okay. Good afternoon. I am, I guess the other one first. Let's look at that for a while. I'm delighted to be here. I want to thank the China Center for extending this invitation to me. It's just been lovely since I received the invitation to have the opportunity to revisit what will always be a very special time among many memories as a regent, as I prepared to come talk to you today, because believe it or not, there were a lot of these facts. I don't know about Professor Farmer. He's probably a lot better about retrieving all of that. But I found myself, and I might mention that to you, there is a China Center newsletter published after our 20th reunion that had a lot of information along with the history, the latest history of the University of Minnesota. I have a few prepared remarks, and but I really want to hear your comments and your questions, so these will be very brief. It has been said that faith is taking the first step when you can't see the top of the staircase. Stepping out on faith is really what the University of Minnesota did in 1979 by sending a delegation of faculty and administrators to China. In the mid-'70s, and it's kind of hard to remember what the atmosphere was back then, but in the mid-'70s, early '80s, it seemed each edition of the Chronicle of Higher Education had an article about another U.S. university establishing educational collaboration with a university in China. The University of Minnesota community was also anxious to explore educational exchange with universities in China. Minnesota, however, wanted to be more thoughtful about outreach efforts, and we wanted to be sure that the programs could be sustained. We also wanted to explore opportunities for our students to travel to China and study. The university-wide advisory committee began in 1978 to explore and evaluate the opportunities for establishing an educational exchange with China and to develop a university exchange policy. It was this committee that recommended a delegation of faculty and administrators travel to China to formalize agreements with universities. When it became apparent that University of Minnesota President C. Peter McGraw would be unable to join the group, I was asked as chair of the Board of Regents to participate. The first delegation of university deans and faculty members were a stellar group of academicians, and I want to present them to you by reading the names so that you remember these people, because we owe them a lot. The 12 members were Dean Neil Galt of the Medical School, Dean Roger Staley, Institute of Technology, Dean Warren Eibel, the Graduate School, Professor Mort Hammermish, Physics Department, Professor C.C. Shao, Aerospace Engineering and Mechanics, Professor Mei-Ling Xu, Geography, Professor C.J. Liu, East Asian Languages, Professor Donald Rasmussen, Plant Breeding and Genetics, Professor Betty Robinette, Linguistics, Professor Yang Wang, the medical school, and Laverne Free from the Office of International Programs. Our purpose was to explore opportunities for educational exchanges. We returned home with 5 signed agreements with Chinese universities. The agreements marked the beginning of an exchange of faculty and students and the establishment of the China Center to support the university's exchange mission and to assist faculty members with their research and teaching activities. The 1980 delegation, led by Professor Farmer, and he'll talk about that, further demonstrated our commitment and deepened our relationships in China. In 1999, our delegation had a 20-year reunion, and I guess I should push this because I'm coming to the end. As we got together and recalled highlights from our trip, they were strikingly similar. All of us comment on the extraordinarily warm reception we received from the Chinese people. There were very serious conversations and deliberations, but there were also gracious banquets and lots of opportunities to enjoy cultural presentations. The most moving memory of all, however, was the alumni reception that we held in Beijing. Some alumni traveled many miles to meet with us. They reminisced about their years at the university and were very candidly sharing stories about the impact the Cultural Revolution had on their lives and on their research. Many of us returned home with notes and letters from them for their revered former university professors. We were all humbled to have played a small role at an historic moment in the life of the University of Minnesota. I served for 16 years as a regent and have many wonderful memories of that service. The 1979 delegation will always be a highlight for me. I thank you for giving me the opportunity to revisit that experience and to speak once again on behalf of the first delegation to the People's Republic of China to establish educational collaboration and reciprocity with the University of Minnesota. Thank you so much, and I look forward to your questions.
Let's welcome Professor Farmer.
You're not going to go next.
Yeah, okay, so this is a picture from the second delegation, which went in 1980, and I was a member of that in the back row there. Even then, not much hair on top. One of the things I thought about in the beginning of this conference, when people were talking about, this is really the second opening to China. You know, we'd heard about people who came in the early part of the 100 years, but this is the post-1979 phase of Minnesota's relationship with China. And it made me think of something that happened in the 1960s. In the 1960s, I was a graduate student on a Fulbright in Taiwan for a couple of years, and while we were there, my wife got a job with the U.S. Information Agency, arm of the consulate that worked with students coming to the United States. And she told a story that says something about Minnesota. There was a orientation for Chinese students going from Taiwan to the United States for graduate school. A room about like this with 100 or so people, and after they had general remarks, they broke them up into groups and said, you know, so all the students who are going to Harvard, you know, go over here. The students who are going to Cornell, go over there. The students going over to Yale, go over here. You know, and 1 or 2 students would get up, and then he said, and then the students going to University of Minnesota, half the room stood up and moved over. So this was a complete surprise to us. We knew nothing about Minnesota, but we discovered at that point that Minnesota had an enormous reputation in China. So I thought that would be would help explain why Minnesota became so important in China relations so fast after 1979. Then the other thing I thought, well, what am I going to do if I start telling war stories here? You know, I can't do much in 6 minutes. And there are a whole lot of war stories. Even though, Wenda, I can't remember much, I can remember enough. I thought maybe it might help to just talk about one of the schools we had a relationship with. Wenda mentioned that they signed 5 agreements in the first year. One of those was with Nankai University. Now, Nankai University is a leading Chinese university. It's in the city of Tianjin, which is about 60 miles from Beijing, port city. And Tianjin has national stature. It's not part of a province. It's a national city like Beijing and Shanghai. And so Nankai was the jewel of Tianjin in educational terms. And one of the things that stood out when Wenda's delegation went there was that these people were ready to deal. They had been completely cut off from the United States since 1949. They had no contact at all. But they were determined they wanted to make a breakthrough, wanted to make a move. And so it tells you something about Nankai. And so we went back there and, well, first of all, they signed an agreement, first time round. And one of the agreements was to welcome the University of Minnesota to conduct a Chinese language program at Nankai in the summer. So I was, I think I was chairing the East Asian Studies department at that time. So I came, next summer I came to visit the campus and see the program, and I believe Emeritus McQuaid was a student in that program. Yeah. And then as that educational exchange grew a bit, Linda Healing Lohman over here, one of the backbone of the U.S.-China People's Friendship Association and a professor at William Mitchell, was one of the TAs in those early days. And to give you an idea of what how Nankai was imagining things, they proposed to us that we write a joint U.S.-Chinese textbook on how to teach Chinese to students, and we did engage in that. But there were other things they did that were equally revealing. One of the first things they did when the Minnesota delegation came was to put on a cocktail party. They had no idea what a cocktail party was, but they knew we did those things, so they did that. And just a few impressions. Having gone back to Nankai many times over the years, took students there twice in the 1980s and then twice again after 2000. And you know, in the first years there, the Chinese didn't have decent cameras, and they'd never seen a computer. And then by the year 2000, they had better cameras than we did. And I went to a conference there in 1980, which was the first international conference held in China for social scientists after 1949. They had another one in 1990 and another one in 2000. I went to the one in 2000. By then, they had better computers than we had. They had projection equipment that was better than the University of Minnesota. The faculty had an underground parking garage, you know, by that time. So you could see the general trend. And maybe one other element here. Nankai, because it was close to Beijing, had to be careful how to position itself. So when we went in 1980, they had this monster Mao Zedong statue on, you know, in front of the administration building. But Nankai found a way to move itself out of Mao's shadow by associating itself with Zhou Enlai. Zhou Enlai was the great premier in China and a very popular man at a time when Mao's stock was not so high. And Zhou Enlai had been to Nankai, you know, and he was always, he'd been to the Nankai middle school, but he was always quoted as saying, "I'm a Nankai guy." What's your Nankai? And so they, one summer we were there in the 80s, and there would be these explosions at night. Boom, boom. And what they were doing was blasting the Mao statue down and doing it after dark. And then a Zhou Enlai statue rose in its place. And I thought, this is really a bit like Minnesota. We've produced 2 vice presidents, you know, no presidents, but 2 vice presidents. So we have a Humphrey Institute, and our law school is named after Mondale. So last year when I went to Nankai, I was invited to speak at their School of International Affairs, the Zhou Enlai School of International Affairs. So the 2 schools have come a little closer together. Thank you.
Let's welcome Dr. Barbara.
To be here. I won't be talking about a historical delegation, but I do have some information to share with us all. Great, yeah. So we're hearing about the development of the partnerships, and we've seen these beautiful displays and the brilliant stories early this afternoon, and the opportunity to hear firsthand of the development of these partnerships. There is more to the story, of course, and that's today's students and scholars who are here at the University of Minnesota from China. I would like to start not at U of M, though, but with a national comparison. It is the case that today, in higher education, approximately 1 in 4 international students are here from China. So if you think about the population of Minneapolis, and if you a little bit more than doubled that, that would represent all of international students in the US, about 820,000. I'm being a bit liberal here with the numbers. Then if you considered the city of St. Paul, that would represent all of the Chinese students. So it's incredibly significant time, right? When undergraduate education became a more viable option, the University of Minnesota itself was incredibly attractive. Of course, the history that we have, we're hearing from the alum directly that they want to come here because of a significant relationship and opportunity that a family or community member had. We have 135 majors here at the University of Minnesota. That's an incredible offering. We also have amazing research. The University of Minnesota is viewed as being good for its value, very affordable for the value, the high quality education that individuals receive. So there's no really great question about why students would continue to come here and why undergraduates in particular would come here. I think many of you know that the scholar population as well is incredibly significant. We do have 368 scholars here from China, and just in case not everyone is familiar, scholars carry out a variety of activities from research and teaching, potentially carrying out their own research or working on significant grant projects here at the University of Minnesota, so contributing directly to research conducted by faculty and staff here. I think it's kind of fun for me to think about when I started my undergraduate education, the #1 sending country was Iran. And I say that to remind us that there's so much involved in the economics and the politics about the exchange of individuals, and we got a chance to hear that firsthand. And I do have for you just a quick visual to show this change in population over time. So this graph that you're looking at represents 1 year of a decade from the start, 1914, to our most recent academic numbers, 2012, 2013. So what you are able to see either directly in the number or through the bar graph, when you start, we've got 3. We all know that well now. There might actually be a test later on in that first year. And then you see, pretty consistent that it's moving along. And then we have, in 1974, we jumped to 400 students. And then that climbs a little bit. And that climb is graduate students. And then we see the next number is a mix of undergrad, grad at 897. And then clearly, I think everybody in the room could recognize, whether or not you can read those numbers, that there's a significant change, and that is representing the change in the undergraduate population. So it is the case today that we have over 2,400 students from China, grad and undergrad, on our campus. In addition, we have close to 400 scholars, so there's no question that the population is incredibly significant. I wanted to share with you, to bring it back to the individual perspective. This spring, the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis researched a story on the impact of international students in the 6 regions of the reserve. As part of the research, 2 vignettes of U of M students were created, and one was Ben Ma, who's from China. Here's what Ben had to say. I came to the U to learn about US culture. It's also provided me an opportunity to learn about the world, meeting students from Malaysia and India, for example. My major is food science. It applies, first of all, that's about applied chemistry. I really like the food safety part and also microbiology. So it's related to my home country's, China's, current issues. I want to contribute to food safety in China. I generally like combining research and real life together. I may pursue a higher degree, and I'll return to China, my home. And so I believe that what Ben states is still the meaningful theme from educational partnerships, which is curiosity, academic rigor, and a desire to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Captor. So we'll open up for questions for 5 minutes.
We've been reading a lot lately about declining enrollment in different educational institutes, and especially in law schools. And so that seems to be there's a big push to recruit Chinese students to come to study at these places in the US. I'm wondering if the U of M is feeling that, and what's your opinion about that, to draw on these Chinese students to support our economic viability for our institutions?
Whose question is this?
Do you want me to address? Yeah.
Well, I think you should. I'm not.
Sure. Sure. I'm happy to respond, and I think there also could be others in the room who are well informed about this as well. From International Student and Scholar Services perspective, we believe strongly that there's benefit in having international students throughout, undergrad, grad, non-degree, et cetera. We believe that it greatly enhances everybody's opportunity. And there's no question that there's demand, that individuals want degrees from a very highly regarded institution. When the question, about the economics of it, I think each program is responsible for understanding, what is the budgetary impact. I can't speak, specifically to the law school. I do know that there is a great diversity in the students in the law school, that they are coming from multiple countries. And also could highlight that our population of international students is significantly from China, 41%, which does make it the case that close to 60% is coming from the world. So we do remain incredibly diverse overall. And I recognize I'm not really doing justice to your question about the economics. I can't speak to it fully as an institution. Yes, Jean
I'd
Allen.
like to answer that question.
All right. Can we get you a microphone?
I'm Jean Allen. I was formerly the Associate Vice President for International Programs, and this was an issue that was close to my heart before I retired. What happened at the University of Minnesota, as far as I know, was quite unique. We lowered non-resident tuition for our undergraduates, and we lowered it to such a degree that it became very attractive for students to look at an institution of this quality and say, that's the place I want to go. And that contributes partly to why those last two bars up there are so high, so different. I would say that in studying this situation, there are a number of institutions now that I think take advantage of non-resident students, including international students. And that is because the non-resident fees are so high that they are 3 or 4 times what the resident student pays. And part of this becomes state policy as well as financial survival. And I think there's no doubt in my mind that some institutions are supporting their operational costs by inordinately high non-resident tuition. And if you've got a son, daughter, grandson, granddaughter, just start exploring them going to an out-of-state public institution, and you'll be looking at tuitions that are similar to private college costs.
Thank you, Jean.
Just a quick question. Are there ways that the university, in collaboration with Chinese institutions, can work on the issue of equity and social justice? Seems that the international experience, I'm in the School of Education, tends to be the bastion of people of middle class, upper middle class, and that people who are poor and children of poor people tend not to have international experiences. I just was involved in Beijing in a community, a migrant community, and their quality of schools was far inferior to what they would normally get. So I was just wondering if the university has any effort to try to get a more equal participation rate on the part of students.
I'm happy to respond.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I think that there's two parts to that. One is individuals who are fee-paying, full tuition-paying. Yes, they have been able to come and have the means to come. It's not necessarily one family contributing to that. There are many, many examples where community is pulling students together. So it's difficult to get the financial data to understand the full spectrum of what the international student population does represent here. At the same time, would absolutely agree that it is the case that wealth provides the access. Scholarships are the critical component to that. And at the University of Minnesota, there is great effort placed on being involved in as many discussions as possible to bring individuals who are sponsored, either through their own government, through non-governmental organizations, through U.S. State Department-sponsored programs. And we're very active in that. Gabi, we're here. Is there anybody from my office who can tell me how many students we have? Is it about 300 sponsored students? About, you're willing to agree with me? Thank you. So it's not enough, but it is significant. We're not talking about just a handful of students. And they come for a variety of programs, for a variety of degree levels. Happy to have someone else have a question.
How about one last question?
I have a question. Can you share if you've had any experience or resources, successes, or struggles with actually starting schools in China? And I'm not talking universities, but more in the youth level. Certain kind of programs, and I mean like basically access. Like how easy is it to get access, legally in China to implement, let's say, a school in a
something, Wanling, you would be able to say? Like, how is it easy to start that? My impression is no. But you would be much welcome.
I can try. My observation is that if anybody outside China to start a school in China, you probably would first checking with Ministry of Education and its local government offices, because there are a lot of regulations and laws in the education field. It specifically regulates how you should implement what kind of schools there. There are a lot of various types of schools there, from elementary like K-12. A lot of international schools there too. They can both enroll international students, so students that hold non-Chinese passports, as well as Chinese national students. But for the specific steps, I don't have that information here, but I believe that you can find that from Chinese government. I think Elizabeth, you would like to add? Oh.
Is my voice loud enough?
Yeah, use the mic.
Okay. So I have been working with preschool project, and they developed curriculum, teach preschool kids through whole brain learning and on a performing arts platform. So they want to go to open a school in China, so they come and consult me. Is that a possibility? So the simple answer to this question is no. Because there are schools like international schools, they can open schools in conjunction with Chinese higher education. So you can set like a so-and-so business school within this college. That's relatively easy to do, but you have to enter kind of a scrutinization and to find out your qualifications and the funds. But if you do a little bit research, I did a little bit research. You can, the foreign entity can set up a school which can only accept like non-Chinese passport. Basically, that's the kids from diplomats or expats, people like that. And there are partnerships you can look into, but like just Wanling said, you have to go to the government. Everything you want to do, business or set up a school or anything, go to the government. Or find some people who can provide a connection, like tell you like this is, probably you can go to this access and to go talk to this people and that people. If you're interested in setting up a franchise, so find some people who can support you and give you ideas and things like that. But I'm sorry, the simple answer is.
Thank you very much.
Can we just give him a chance to ask his question right quick?
Sure.
Was it a long question?
Oh, I just wondered if part of the reason for the big increase at the end is that so many more people in China have so much more money that they're more capable of paying their own way over. Is that a factor?
My understanding is yes. I mean, the change in the economics, and while this is significant for U of M, you would see, as Professor Allen was alluding to, other institutions that would have even significantly larger percentage increases of students from China. So it is a national phenomena within China.
There's a lot of competition for the positions in China. You have to go through a centralized testing procedure to get placed in a good school. So a lot of people are just following what's an easier path, sending kids over here to finish high school, get their English up, get an undergraduate degree in the United States now, and go to American graduate school. And they bypass that whole examination competition route, and they can afford it.
And it's a profound decision, right, at the age of 16 to embark on that journey on the personal level. It's a very significant pathway to having access to higher education. So a lot of complexity, I think, to the choices that people make.
I think in families, a lot of these decisions are made before the child is 10 years old. You know?
Listen to your mother.
Yeah, because your future depends on it.
Right now, we better listen to you, which I think is our time is up.
Yes, thank you very much, panelists. Let's give them a warm thank you.